Airport checkpoints had been operated by the airlines and monitored by the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, which I had worked for since 1989. Like other FAA security agents, I doubted that rearranging organizational charts would change things for the better. We were told the TSA, a large, centralized agency with sweeping new powers, would succeed where the FAA had failed.
Aviation security under FAA was virtually non-existent. Anybody could virtually do anything they wanted to, anytime they wanted to. But TSA has taken things a step further. It's a disaster waiting to happen.
We went from an agency that was supposed to conduct actual screening for people that wanted to hurt us to where now we're failing operational tests left and right.
The TSA is reacting today and spending millions today on something that the terrorists did yesterday.
To understand what we have now with the TSA, we have to start with the FAA in the years leading up to 9/11. The FAA worked closely with the airlines to help move passengers onto planes as quickly as possible. Security, however, was never the priority it should have been. Although the odds of any individual being killed by terrorists are remote, many of us were well aware that murderous fanatics were likely to exploit vulnerabilities in the nation's aviation system. As frontline agents, we had a unique view of that system. A system which routinely dismissed our concerns or buried our reports completely. A system we had been recruited into specifically because of our counterterrorism and military experience. Mine began about 40 years ago with a military police unit in upstate New York. After graduating from the military police officer basic course, I received my initial assignment, which was to Seneca Army Depot in Romulus, New York. My uncle, on my mother's side, was Speaker of the House John McCormick, so I guess you could say the family had some political connections. Long into the tour, a soldier was killed in Vietnam. The soldier came from New York, and I was assigned as the survival assistance officer. When I went to present the flag to the mother, she didn't let go of my hands. Felt like an eternity. And when she did, I rendered that slow salute. It was right there, right then and there, that I knew we weren't using any political connections. I was going to Vietnam. During my time in Vietnam, I was an S2 intelligence officer. As time went on, I eventually retired as a Lieutenant Colonel Provost Marshal from the military after 23 years. And then after that, I became an FAA special agent. When I first started with the FAA, I had a lot of faith in the system, and I felt that they took advantage of my expertise. But as time went on, I found that anyone who made waves, anyone who caused a ripple in the pond, anyone who was raising the uncomfortable suggestion that maybe we were vulnerable to attack, was kind of pushed off into the corner. And that was created by management folks who had a vested interest in working with the airlines and working with upper-level management to say, yes, the systems that we're using are effective, when, in fact, your line agents knew they weren't effective. One of those agents is Bogdan Zakovic. He lost his mom and dad at an early age and spent countless hours as a kid studying World War II to better understand the lives of his parents, who had suffered through the brutal fighting between Germany and Russia on the Eastern Front.
In my research, just watching and reading about the World War II, I was just stunned at man's inhumanity to man. And I knew that I would gravitate towards some type of work trying to minimize that type of activity. And as my early career in the federal government started, I drifted towards the law enforcement side.
Bogdan began his career in the Coast Guard, then moved to the Naval Investigative Service in the mid-'80s. In 1985, TWA Flight 847 from Athens was hijacked and taken to Beirut. A 17-day ordeal ensued in which one passenger, Robert Steetham, a U.S. Navy diver, was tortured and killed, then had his body dumped onto the tarmac. The incident prompted a refocus of the FAA's Air Marshal program to prevent aviation-related terrorism. Bogdan was recruited into the Air Marshals in 1988 and promoted to team leader in 1993.
It was exactly where I wanted to be. I considered it a vocation, actually, because our main focus was purely to prevent acts of terrorism in the aviation environment. When I went overseas as an air marshal, we would frequently have liaison with like the local law enforcement people of the country that we were in, as well as the federal authorities. And we would exchange ideas and just talk. I soon found that there was so much information on terrorism from purely open sources that I couldn't keep it all. I had a stack of documents. So after a couple of years, I started my own terrorism database. And I actually briefed the team on open source information on terrorism, which was better than the classified briefing that we had. And because there's a mentality in the elements of the intelligence community that the more I know, the less you know, and that makes me, a little more important. So they don't tell you what you need to know, so they keep a lot of it to themselves.
The importance of government agencies sharing information became painfully obvious on December 21st, 1988, when a bomb hidden in a piece of luggage destroyed Pan Am Flight 103. All 256 people on board were killed, as were 11 others in Lockerbie, Scotland, when wreckage of the 747 smashed into the small village. An inquiry into the disaster in 1990 exposed a number of failures which were never addressed prior to 9/11 and continue to plague U.S. aviation security.
There was an incident just days before Pan Am 103 was bombed. A caller to the U.S. Embassy in Helsinki warned the embassy that within 2 weeks, a U.S. airliner would be targeted for destruction. The embassy took that information, circulated it among the embassy personnel of U.S. facilities worldwide. They didn't notify airlines. They didn't notify the FBI. They didn't notify the CIA. They just circulated so that, as we learned in the course of our investigation, that some State Department personnel chose not to fly the U.S. carriers the weekend of Pan Am 103. We were appalled by this. We said that, as we inquired further, it turns out that there was sort of a bureaucratic maze involved. An assistant secretary of state would not deign to call an administrator of FAA, or for heaven's sakes, an associate administrator of FAA, because that's beneath that person's level of standing within the government agency.
Several years after Pan Am 103 was destroyed over Lockerbie, Bogdan met Steve Elson, an FAA security special agent.
We began to talk quite a bit, and we found we had many similar experiences. We were both somewhat frightened by what we saw in the FAA regarding vulnerabilities. We both had backgrounds in terrorism, academically and operationally. And the more we talked, the more we became determined to try to work and remedy some of those problems.
I met Steve in 2001. He had joined the FAA after a distinguished 22-year career as a Navy SEAL. He served in Vietnam, worked numerous counterterrorism operations, earned a master's degree in national security affairs, and eventually retired as a lieutenant commander. In the FAA, he served as a member of the Red Team, and was later joined by Bogdan, who was assigned to the unit in the mid-90s. Red Team is a military term for personnel who test the defenses of friendly forces using enemy tactics. The teams are employed by various government agencies to provide essential data on the effectiveness of security measures.
In the red team, we went out and did realistic testing. And we used innocuous items that should have caused people to inspect us more closely. On a number of occasions, we used real items, guns, grenades, or bombs. And the results were pretty much the same. Once you got out of the standard FAA testing realm, which these screeners are conditioned to, failure rates generally remain above 90%. That's failure rates.
In the 1997-1998 timeframe, the FAA Red Team was tasked with doing a lot of screening checkpoint testing domestically. And we probably went to about 20 to 25 major airports around the country. And the results were fairly abominable. They ranged at a low of about a 3% success rate of the screeners detecting our objects at one airport, up to about 20% at the best airports.
Standard testing had a 22, 32, or 38 caliber semi-automatic pistol in a block of lucite plastic. You could see through it. And the barrel had to be pointed down, which made no difference since it was in a big block of plastic. And if we had somehow screwed up, put the block of plastic in with the barrel up, that negated the test. And I had a case when the screener went back, they touched me and I turned a little bit. They completely missed the weapon. Of course, the airlines claimed that I cheated, and the FAA said, that's right, he shouldn't have moved, and they threw the test out. Terrorists aren't like that. They're sneaky.
You know, there was a very close relationship between FAA and the airline industry, and they weren't going to upset that apple cart.
I'm in Houston. I am told I am to go out, stand in front of an aircraft in a coat and tie in 100-something-degree weather, just basically stand in front of the aircraft. I had to stand there 5 minutes and make sure that any people working around the airport actually looked at me to see I didn't have a badge. So I started writing headquarters. I said, no, I'm confused out here in the field. Do we have some memorandum of understanding or memorandum of agreement with the terrorists that we and they will always agree on the way things are to be done, and then when they go out to blow up a plane, they will wear a suit and tie, stand 5 minutes in front of the plane, and make sure somebody sees them before they're allowed to put a bomb on the plane. I didn't get very many kind responses from the FAA.
Usually the worse the results were that we had in any given type of project, the less we were tasked to retest to see if they improved. And the screening checkpoint was testing regimen that we did was one of those programs. Wherever we went. The second thing was I also knew that the terrorist threat was increasing dramatically, that there literally was a paradigm shift
two events were especially ominous. They indicated the introduction of suicide tactics into the realm of aviation and were designed to kill people by the thousands. On Christmas Eve of 1994, Air France Flight 8969 from Algeria was hijacked at the gate and flown to Marseille. While it was on the ground, French commandos stormed the plane, freed all 171 hostages aboard, and killed the 4 hijackers. The assailants, members of the armed Islamic group, had planned to have the plane refueled, depart, and crash it into or explode it over the center of Paris. French authorities traveled to Washington, D.C. and briefed FAA officials about the plot in early 1995. 2 weeks after the Air France incident, police in the Philippines discovered an extraordinary Al-Qaeda plot known as Bojinka, a term used by jihadists in Afghanistan in the 80s, meaning Big Bang. One part of the plan involved simultaneous mid-air detonations of U.S.-bound airliners over the Pacific Ocean. Another portion entailed flying a plane into the Pentagon or CIA headquarters.
So those two situations right there should have been a massive wake-up call, but having been still with FAA security at the time, they could care less about it. Management would end any discussion about improving security by stating, it was words to the effect, and I've heard this I don't know how many times during that time frame, that we must be doing something right because we have not had a terrorist attack since Pan Am 103. Management simply did not tolerate any kind of dissenting opinion or even a discussion about maybe we should do things better. They had a dictatorial approach to how they did things, and if you didn't like it, then get the hell out of it was their approach.
Like many of us, Bogdan was completely frustrated with management's indifference. Except he stepped up and sent a letter through the chain of command to the head of the FAA, Jane Garvey, in August of 1998. His detailed letter presented numerous concerns and observations. He never received a reply. Bogdan then worked with Steve Elson to present evidence to the Criminal Investigation Section of the Inspector General's office.
I had a number of meetings with the head of the Criminal Investigations Office, and in one meeting, he took a piece of paper like this that I had just given him, and he threw it up in the air like this, and he said, FAA is so fucked up, I don't even know where to begin. And then at a subsequent meeting, he said, unless you give me a dead body and a smoking gun, there's nothing we can do against the FAA, the managers in FAA, because of the political situation between the Department of Transportation and the FAA. And, well, 9/11, of course, happened, and we had nearly 3,000 dead bodies and a smoking cannon, and the IG still didn't do anything.
By the spring of 2001, I was retired and no longer subject to a chain of command and its threat of retaliation. I contacted a Boston television reporter, Deborah Sherman, and called Steve Elson.
We traveled through with hidden cameras to show you how more than 30 million passengers are
Together,
every year.
we created a news story about the ease with which weapons and explosives could move through security checkpoints and onto aircraft at Boston's Logan International Airport.
Chemical weapons, knives, guns, grenades, bombs, virtually anything you can think of.
Unlike most travelers, we hoped we would get stopped at the checkpoints.
The video was done in late April. It showed on May 6th. So on May 7th, I developed a letter and sent it to Senator Kerry and basically referred to the video report, the vulnerabilities we found at the security checkpoints, and spoke to him about the concerns I had about jihadist terrorists being able to take down multiple flights on any given day. I also filed a hotline complaint with Jane Garvey, the head of the FAA administrator, who also used to be the director of Massport, figuring that in her position as the FAA administrator, if I made her aware of these security concerns at Logan, that she might take some action. The bottom line is, between May of 2001 and 9/11, no action was taken.
But when the screener searches
The very same checkpoints that we addressed in the report, those were the very same checkpoints that Mohammed Atta and his cohorts bypassed on 9/11.
we now know some could also be getting on airplanes.
examining the intelligence indicators which preceded the 9/11 attacks was kind of like watching a bathtub filled with water. It was just a matter of time before the bathtub would overflow or the attack would occur. There was so much information that it was inevitable that something was going to happen. And the problem we had was trying to get someone in authority in either FAA or Congress to turn the faucet off. And when 9/11 occurred, the first thing that came out of their mouth was, we simply had no idea anything like this was going to happen. We didn't know security was this bad. They acted like this was a great big surprise, and they were totally caught off guard, when in fact they had tons of information that not only was the threat increasing, but that security was essentially a joke.
When I saw American Airlines 11 and United 175 fly into the World Trade Center, I was devastated. I was sick to my stomach. My first thought, because of what I had been involved with, went to terrorism. And when I saw the second plane slam into the World Trade Center, it was just confirmation of what I knew was a likelihood to happen. To then hear Congress and folks like Condoleezza Rice and Jane Garvey say, how could we have foreseen this? Maybe if you listened to your people, it would have helped. That makes you angry. You're out there putting it on the line. You're out there in the trenches, and some fat cat in D.C. with their six-figure salary. It's like what you want to say, or the information you're trying to bring to their attention, it's like you don't count at all. We have all the answers up there. And you know what 9/11 showed? They had none of the answers.
In the days after September 11, I realized that when we pieced the sequence of events together, starting from Maine to Logan Airport and at Dulles, that I'd been on the right track all along about a federalized screener workforce, more rigorous standards, better training, better supervision, and separate the workforce from the airlines.
About 2 weeks after 9/11, I was invited to go to Capitol Hill from both the House and the Senate committee that we dealt with before 9/11. And when we walked in there, the staff members, these are the senior staff members, one of the first things they said was, you were right, both about the vulnerabilities in security and the terrorist attack. But our concern now is, where do we go from here? So we spent well over an hour and a half discussing some of the things they should do. And our big warning was not to establish another super agency like the TSA.
One of the issues that I have personally is I helped create TSA, and I've referred to it sometimes as either my bastard child or a monster that we've created, a bureaucratic monster. And unfortunately, when we raise a family or have children, sometimes they turn out the way you don't expect. That's the same way with government programs. Our intent after 9/11 was put together a system, aviation security system, that would protect Americans against future terrorist attacks. And it didn't turn out exactly the way I intended.
When TSA was first created, they essentially spent the first 3 years of their existence meeting congressional mandates that were very difficult to meet. They had to stand up an agency, hire over 50,000 screeners, deploy technology that manufacturers couldn't develop quickly enough. And so they didn't have a whole lot of time to think, do kind of the systematic planning, and put the rigor in their processes that maybe GAO would have liked to have seen.
The new agency also spent its first years staffing up with the same FAA managers who had been responsible for aviation security prior to 9/11. When these managers took control in early 2002, one of the first things they did was to strip Bogdan of his red team duties. But he continued to press on through appropriate channels in order to expose the FAA's culpability in the 9/11 tragedy.
I mean, who do you go to when the whole system seems to be broken? And what I discovered is the United States Office of Special Counsel, which is supposedly an independent organization that only reports directly to the President of the United States. And when I finally submitted my case to the Office of Special Counsel, I believe my narrative report was around 40 pages long, and my documentary evidence was around 500 pages long. And that was the beginning of my tenure as a whistleblower. 3 times in my career, I took the oath of office that I was required to, which basically stated that I am obligated to abide by the Constitution of the United States. There is nothing in there about giving blind loyalty to any federal agency, nor do I pledge any allegiance to any political party or a congressman or the President of the United States. He is not my boss in this respect. I work for some farmer in Kansas that I've never met before. And I work for a waitress in LA that I've never met before. And, I work for some business manager in Boston that I never met before. These are the people that are actually paying my salary and whom I'm working for. And that is what the oath is meant for. I'm not for any politician or bureaucrat.
In February of 2003, the Office of Special Counsel concluded their investigation. They agreed with 99% of Bogdan's allegations, finding the FAA's actions constituted waste, abuse, and a gross threat to public safety. That same month, he was transferred to an administrative position, answering the telephone on the graveyard shift.
After roughly 25 to 26 years of dedicated, faithful service in the federal government, and I'm stuck doing entry-level work that some kid could do right out of high school.
Well, I believe in government. It's not how much you spend, but how you spend it. We're spending a lot of money, and what's happened is predictable. First, we're going to have 20,000 screeners, federal screeners. Then it turned into 40,000. Now it's 58,000, a small army. Actually, the rule of thumb is the more people you have involved in trying to detect weapons, materials like explosives that could take down an aircraft, the more people you have, the less efficient the operation. The higher the technology, you actually can use fewer people and you get better detection. But heaven forbid TSA would replace people with technology.
Mr. Hawley, I know that we spent a bunch of money on checkpoint technology and reconfiguration. And I know that we did spend a bunch of money on explosive trace portals. And GAO has reported that 114 of these explosive trace portals are sitting in storage at a cost of over $20 million. If we didn't need them, why did we buy them? And if we need them, why are they sitting in storage?
There are some maintenance issues with them in terms of they're called puffers because they put compressed air out, and lint and other things go up into the filters and can clog them. And we're working with the industry to make them more reliable. And in other words, when you have a large portal in the
The one area where they've made the least progress is in technology. And since TSA's creation, they've researched and developed 10 technologies. Of those, none of them have been deployed at airports nationwide. Some of them have initiated deployments, but nothing's been out there nationwide at all the commercial airports.
What TSA focuses on is the threat du jour. A TSA tester had a bag, they put clothing in, they put a bomb assembled in, they put clothing, they put a bottle of water on top. The bag goes through. The screener and the x-ray stop the bag, lift the bottle of water off, close the bag, return the bag to the TSA tester, who then took the bag with the fully assembled bomb and went aboard plane. They focus on all kinds of minutia and crap rather than the items they need to.
What do you do for a living? Am I legally required to tell you that? Well, I'll tell you what. You want to play smartass, and I'm not going to play your fucking game.
I was coming back from a Campaign for Liberty conference, which is my employer, in St. Louis, late March. And as I was going through the screener, the last set of security, I had in my laptop carry-on box a metal cash box that was carrying about $4,700 in donations, ticket sales, bumper sticker sales, T-shirts, things like that.
The Stephen Bierfeld incident that's a good example of the randomness at airports. He was pulled out of line because they saw a metal box in his bag. They wanted to look inside the metal box. They found money. Apparently you can't travel with money anymore. You have to explain to the government why you had the money, which is what he was pulled into a small room and harassed to tell the government why he had money. This was a very unique situation for the news media because it wasn't just someone's word. We heard the entire conversation.
Why do you have all this?
I asked if am I required by law to answer the question.
I'm just asking you why you have police right now.
I understand
You want
why.
to talk to DEA about it?
As I was going from the airport terminal into this small windowless room, I can see I'm being led into it, and my thought is, this may be a bigger deal than it is so far. I've already gone this far with this guy. I'm not going to give up my rights. I know what the Constitution says. I'm pretty firm on not bending on that. Let me make sure there's, a non-biased witness and recording of the whole thing. So I was carrying an iPhone, and I just happened to take it out of my pocket, click record on it, put it in my front jacket pocket, and walk into the room. And from that point on, it records the whole conversation.
It's a simple question. I just want to know why you have police right now. That's not an unusual thing. I care if they need $50 with
He
it.
refuses to answer any questions. He don't want to answer. So we gonna have to take him down to the station
that's
and let
suspicious.
DEA, FBI, and all the people talk to him.
Every one of them.
First is the TSA, then it's the police officers, then the police officers are shouting at me and cursing at me, then they're threatening to arrest me and take me to the FBI. At any point do I just say, all right, fine. But then I'd be giving up, the rights that I 10 minutes ago said were so important to me.
Are you from this planet? I mean, you understand the question when I'm asking you?
I knew what the Constitution said, and I was simply asking them, am I required by law to answer your questions? Please tell me what my rights are. Can you search me without cause? Am I breaking a law?
You will be if you don't walk out the
Of course,
door.
yes. You're going to the station. You'll be forced.
Okay,
That's fine.
I understand.
You're going to go on the station.
Now, do we have to put you in handcuffs or will we have a problem?
No, sir.
With you walking through this
No, sir.
terminal?
Detained, yes.
Okay, that's fine, sir. I don't understand the law. I'm happy to go.
Well, we're gonna help you understand if you don't.
So they take me out of the room, the police officers, and I get about another 10 yards down the concourse back towards the front of the airport, and a plainclothes officer, who I guess was some type of supervisor, calls them back, and he says, what are you guys doing? And I go back in the room, and about a minute later, he says, these are campaign contributions and money for your organization. There were also checks that said to Campaign for Liberty, so it wasn't that difficult. And I said, oh, yeah. And he said, you're free to go.
You're free to go.
Okay, thank you. I'm not saying that TSA does not have the right to search for legitimate reasons. In my case, what I did had nothing to do with airline security. I was literally carrying money. I was carrying cash, which is legal. I think it sets a very bad precedent when the TSA is more focused on that than they are on security.
It's a continual process to try to keep a TSA from overstepping their bounds. Yes, we want to detect things that would offer a threat. Yes, we want to stop people who would pose a threat, but the system now treats everybody sort of like a potential terrorist, and that's not the way it should be.
You're suspicious. To me.
Boarding pass is ready. All items are on the belt. All facts, persons, bundles, unlaces, shoes, and overcoats on the belt.
The system currently relies on 45,000 security checkpoint screeners, known officially as Transportation Security Officers, or TSOs. Their title, uniforms, and badges imply that they are law enforcement officers, but they are not.
When you put someone in the uniform with a shield, there's an expectation by the public that that person can protect them and function as a police officer. Not someone you simply dress up in nice pants and a nice shirt and a shiny badge and say, let's play cop.
Again, one of the problems we've had with TSA is we've created the bureaucracy. It was a bureaucracy based on screening. Now it's evolving into enforcement. You've seen the colorful, very expensive badges to try to signal that they're law enforcement officers. That wasn't intended. As with any bureaucracy, they try to extend their authority, and you see the same thing going on with TSA.
Despite the badge, TSA screeners are not empowered to make arrests, nor are they authorized to use force. That remains the responsibility of federal and local police officers.
In 1980, I joined the New York City Police Department, September of 1980. I was assigned to the Narcotics Division, where I performed as an undercover officer in surveillance. Then I was assigned to the Drug Enforcement Task Force. As an undercover officer, I used to bandage myself, a lot of times, and either put my gun in my hand, or I carry a Bible at one point that was carved up to hold my gun in there, especially in the summer when I used to wear shorts and a tank top in the streets. The situations, might escalate where you might be surrounded by 4 or 5 guys, all with guns, and some of them pointed at you, very hostile situation. They might be trying to kill you,
You gotta talk them into, a state of being a little more relaxed and a little more confidence and, trusting you to the point where they put their guns away and say, we were just kidding, we only testing you. It's like, okay, but the next time you point that gun at me, I'm gonna kill you.
Detective Puello retired from the NYPD in January of 2001. Like many others who stepped forward after the 9/11 attacks, his sense of duty prompted him to re-enter public service. He signed on as a TSA screening supervisor and trainer in 2002. He brought with him 20 years of undercover experience. But once on board, he was shocked to learn that the new TSA was being run by former FAA managers.
The federal security directors and very high-level officials within the TSA that were being named were from the FAA. If they failed us in the first place, what would make someone think that they're gonna do any better or they're gonna perform differently? For example, during the testing by the red team and other teams that came through the airport, there were several times where the screening workforce was made aware either on that day or that they were coming and they would be around during the week or the month.
Tipping off screeners about the red team's arrival to improve testing scores was a common practice used by FAA management in the 1990s when I was a special agent. It is a serious breach of security protocol. It was one of the reasons why the Office of Special Counsel had cited the FAA as a substantial and specific danger to public safety in Bogdan Zakhovic's whistleblower case in 2002. Yet the practice continued. In 2006, an email from TSA Assistant Administrator Mike Restovich alerted airport field officers to a red team operation. When Congress learned of it, an inquiry followed, beginning with Kip Hawley, the TSA administrator.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Restovich's name is on here. Apparently, he never saw it before it went out.
I believe, with everything I know, Mr. Restovich had no knowledge of this email until after it had been sent.
And I take exception. It looks like, if you read this carefully, it looks like there's been others before this. It's just too smooth.
Is it true that the language in that email references...
Hawley had been the CEO of a supply chain software company before being asked to run the TSA in 2005.
Mr. Hawley, how can you say that there was no cheating?
I don't know.
Is it true?
Like many other TSA managers, he had no prior experience in aviation security.
The language of the memo is a tip-off.
No, there were tests.
The question is, was there cover blowing?
I do not know the origin of the word.
Mr. Hawley, we're talking about whether or not there was a tip-off.
We had a perfect opportunity after 9/11 when we created the Transportation Security Administration. We wanted to build an organization that was streamlined, decentralized, and effective. Instead, we ended up with an organization that was a bloated bureaucracy and centralized in decisions.
The organization started by trying to tap into law enforcement and military experience, personnel with experience. Then they went directly the opposite way. It was very obvious that our law enforcement and military background was a hindrance. They felt threatened that we knew too much, that we were too independent. They want really puppy dogs that they could train, malleable individuals, and that's why the recruitment is deplorable. If they say, I need the airline needs 2 lanes open, and you don't have enough personnel, not even for 1 lane, well, those individuals, are malleable. They will succumb to the pressure and they say, yes, sir, and go open up a lane with 1 person on the x-ray and 1 on the walkthrough and allow just about everybody in. There's nobody to perform back searches or handheld metal detector, so anything else besides that is just rush the passengers through. They started promoting certain individuals that, with very low qualifications just because they were yes men. If they were willing to compromise security and to do whatever they were told, to rush passengers through, to open up extra lanes without proper and mandated number of screeners, and to conduct proper training and the on-the-job training conducted according to Congress mandates, they got promoted. Management did not want somebody who could stand their grounds and say no to compromising security, to changing and cutting corners here and there.
On 9/11, I was active duty in the Air Force, out on a flight line working on a military aircraft. Immediately after that, I saw the Federal Air Marshal job posted on the internet. And I just looked back on my qualifications from law enforcement to military police work, civilian police work, and then my experience as an aircraft maintenance technician, and I thought it was a perfect background for a Federal Air Marshal. And it was soon after that is when I was hired.
To become a Federal Air Marshal, it's preferred that the candidate come with a diversified law enforcement background. Part of the reasoning is they get called in the worst case scenario to do things which involve taking deadly force, conceivably, to prevent a plane from being turned into a missile or for losing lives. There's no need to sugarcoat it.
When I came in, there weren't too many of us that had arrived here yet to the Las Vegas field office. So I had the pleasure of seeing quite a few people coming in. We had guys coming from SEALs, Special Forces, police departments, SWAT teams.
After 9/11, you had a lot of patriotic members of the federal law enforcement community step up and volunteer to fill the role as a temporary air marshal. They walked away from their jobs and their families, and they made the sacrifice because they believed in their country. You had qualified people with a diversified background of law enforcement experience, making that organization whole.
Prior to every mission, the air marshals would go out and shoot. And they would shoot a firearms course called the TPC. It's a very difficult firearms course, and the air marshals are very proud of it. If you could not pass the TPC test, you didn't keep your job. Until the TSA took over. When that happened, these new managers that came in, they couldn't pass the TPC test. On occasion, they fly with us. They had to pass that TPC test. They couldn't do it. He just got rid of the test.
It's very important to stay focused on the unique environment that the air marshals operate in. They're in what we call a close quarters environment. There isn't much room. There's very little margin of error there. You either will stop the threat or you don't stop the threat, and the consequences are severe if you fail.
No other federal agency had such high firearm standards, and we were proud of that. And then one day, we're not going to do it anymore.
So now the program evolves where we need to desperately protect our airline industry. We're under a great time constraint. We don't want our airline industries to fold. We want the American public to be confident that they can fly and safely get from point A to point B. So you've got a quality group of federal law enforcement officers who are now making up what is the Air Marshal Service post 9/11. Since that time, their attrition rate has been very high. And more immediately during that time period, there were issues with the executive management within the service. They were more focused on things like dress code than they were on real strategic practices that would best protect the public.
Senior managers would actually call air marshals who were on board a plane for takeoff and ask them to deboard the plane to make sure they had their sports coat or dress code. I talked to air marshals who hid in the lab and turned off their cell phone to hide from managers because they didn't meet the dress code. Whether they were flying to Hawaii or Vegas, they had to wear a coat and a tie, and they stood out like sore thumbs. The concern that the air marshals had is that if we stand out to other passengers, then we're going to stand out to the bad guys.
Right when the policy was established, we went to our supervisors and said, this is making our job very difficult. How do you expect us to blend in with the passengers when we're wearing suits and ties? And of course, their reply was, we need to have you have a professional image on that plane. Well, the managers believed that in case of a hijacking, if we were not dressed in a full suit with military grooming standards, the passengers on the plane would not believe we were federal air marshals. We boarded the aircraft before the passengers. That was one of the flaws in the boarding procedures. And when the passengers saw us board ahead of time, they knew we were the air marshals. When they got on board the plane, they would shake our hand, they would pat us on the back and thank us for being on the plane. Well, if the passengers know who the air marshals are, so do the terrorists. It wasn't too long where air marshals were calling this new policy the kill me first dress code policy. You kill the guys with the suits first.
After being hired into the Air Marshal Service, I was at my field office just a short time, and the Deputy Assistant Director from Washington, D.C. came down, and our SAC, the Special Agent in charge, met with a group of us, and they wanted a question and answer period. I raised my hand and I said,
Hey, can you please tell me about why you're divulging so much information to the media? The deputy assistant director was pretty upset with my comment. Apparently there had been some tender feelings of that Federal Air Marshal Services management being kind of offended by air marshals who said, wait a minute, why are you giving our information away to the public?
The director at the time and the executive management were more concerned about appearances than the reality of meaningful safety. They reveal what we consider to be critical information that otherwise would help to protect the air marshal's identity and to increase the chances of protecting the airplanes and making sure passengers get from point A to point B. So they exert executive privilege to reveal this information, which I consider as a career law enforcement officer, critical, sensitive information to the public. Anybody with a remote control can sit there on their couch and be the potato they want to be and watch this and say, oh, really? So this is how they operate.
It showed them pre-boarding, it showed them talking to the crew, it showed them conducting searches, it showed how they were dressed, it showed what kind of ammunition and what kind of weapon they carried. They gave out all this information.
The management structure thought it was best to take their playbook and simply hand it out to anybody who expressed an interest. Wrong move. You know how you brag? You brag by not giving up your planes. You brag by what doesn't happen. And when an agency is run well, in silence, you speak volumes. When you do your job, you don't need to brag, you don't need to boast, you don't need to showcase your operating flying protocol on national news and TV and the networks.
Lieutenant Bruce, an air marshal who no longer flies missions, gave us a look inside the job of protecting our skies.
We're talking about air marshals on board planes. NBC's Robert Hager got an exclusive inside look.
When they're not revealing sensitive material on purpose, TSA occasionally does it by accident, such as the inadvertent internet posting in March 2009 of their 93-page screening manual, which provided sensitive details on everything from equipment calibration to examples of CIA credentials. Predictably, TSA management downplayed the significance of the breach, just as they had years earlier with another embarrassing incident.
In July of 2003, we were all called into the field office and told that we had to have a security briefing, a one-on-one security briefing, where we had to come in, sit down with the security officer, and he was going to brief us on a threat. We had never had that done before.
The air marshals were informed of a threat involving international travel, which included a stopover at an American airport to change planes. It warned that terrorists might use improvised weapons smuggled aboard aircraft in countries with lax security, then hijack planes as they transited through the United States. Protecting these flights and U.S. airspace would require deploying air marshals on additional overnight assignments.
Within a week of receiving this security briefing, we received a text message on our phone from Air Marshal Headquarters, unbelievably stating that all overnight flights were being canceled. I thought it was a joke. We all did. I mean, that's our job.
They all geared up, they were ready to respond and deal with the threat. Then they get a message sent to them in their internal system saying, you will stand down, we don't have the money to cover the expense it would take to house you or put you up in a hotel. You know, if you need the money to respond to a real threat, you go to Congress and ring the damn bell. But you respond to it. You always respond to the threat first. And if it costs an expense, if you're in the hole, I would think that our government would certainly fund a response to a meaningful threat whose impact could be quite severe.
One air marshal decided he was going to leak the contents of the text message to the media, and within a couple days of us receiving that message, he did in fact leak that to the media.
He interacts with a news affiliate, he discusses this, and by way of anecdotal reaccounting of what transpired, rather than disputing what he said, they simply punish him and say, you revealed sensitive security information. You compromised our program. It's like, what did he compromise? You withdrew. You didn't respond to the threat. So what, in fact, did he compromise? What did he reveal? That you decided covering a hotel expense was more important than protecting the lives of those flying?
When the contents of the text message was leaked to the media, the management of the Air Marshal Service went completely ballistic.
Hi, I'm Senator Boxer from California, a member of the Commerce Committee. I'm very proud.
Congress, on the other hand, they took note of it, and the day after it was reported in the media, Senators Boxer, Clinton, and Schumer held a press conference condemning what TSA did.
This agency
has hired people to recruit baggage screeners. They sent them not just to Telluride, to a luxury spa, to the Waldorf Astoria, Wyndham Peaks in Telluride, I mentioned, Mandalay Bay in Hawaii, Hawks Cay Resort, the Florida Keys. This agency says we can't afford to have sky marshals flying around protecting air travelers because we can't afford to have them stay in hotels. Well, you know, when it dealt with recruiting, they stayed in the best hotels in the world.
The day after these senators gave their press conference and their condemnation of what TSA did, somehow, out of the blue, $9 million appeared the very next day. And with that $9 million, the air marshals were allowed to do their overnights for the remainder of the fiscal year. What does that tell you about how the TSA feels about not only us, but the passengers on the plane? $9 million? We're going to risk your safety over $9 million?
Our figures reflect that from fiscal year 2004, and there's not really good, accurate data before FY 2004. So we started 04 through FY 09. It's $33 billion has been spent by TSA on transportation security issues. The vast majority of that is devoted to aviation security, and a very small percentage to surface transportation security.
So after the leak, the management were really pissed, and they wanted to find out who the air marshal was that leaked to the media. Their first suspects were the board members of the newly formed Federal Air Marshal Association, and I was on that board. So immediately they called me into an interrogation at the Las Vegas field office, and I made it known to them that I was not the air marshal who had leaked, and they didn't believe me. They continued to accuse me of being the one who did make the leak, and frankly, that really pissed me off. So they kept accusing me over and over and over, and I kept denying it over and over until finally we came to an impasse, and they said, all right, we've just concluded that you're guilty. They said, we're taking you off of flight status. We're going to put you on what's called disciplinary non-flight status, and you're not going to fly, neither is your team. They said, report tomorrow morning for duty here at the field office. You're not going to the airport. So that's exactly what I did. I was informed by the second in command to wash all the fleet vehicles. So there I am, out in back of the field office, suit and tie, following my orders. You know, the irony in this whole story is I never decided to become a whistleblower. That was never my choice. I was accused of being a whistleblower in front of all of my peers. I was blackballed as a whistleblower. I was punished as a whistleblower. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be labeled a whistleblower, I might as well become a whistleblower. And that's exactly what I did. The agency created me.
There were so many air marshals that would say, hey, here are the problems. Here's why we don't have proper security on the airplanes. And yet the management was lambasting them for even saying so or suggesting so. Why? Just fix the problems.
This is frustrating. GAO in 2003 found a member of Al-Qaeda working on an airplane in a foreign
People
jurisdiction.
have outlined how they've been punished for whistleblowing in the past.
Being told the truth, they ask the person who tells the truth to depart.
We need to listen to them. They're on the phone lines, not me, not you.
In August of 2004, I flew to Washington, D.C. and gave testimony to the House Judiciary Committee regarding the corruption that I was seeing in the Federal Air Marshal Service. The committee took almost 2 years to issue their final report, which came out in May of 2006. The TSA requested a copy prior to it being released to the public. Representative Sensenbrenner said, sure, we'll give you a copy, and he did, and the TSA took a copy to review. So once TSA got their hands on this report, they took a nice big black pen and blacked out most of the important things in the report. Then they sent it back to Representative Sensenbrenner and says, gee, thanks for letting us look at it, but we put a nice big stamp of sensitive security information on the front of it, and you can't release it to the public now. What was that information? It was all information that was embarrassing to TSA.
No agency should, in a matter of sensitive information, disclosure or withholding of information or building of files, should have complete independent discretion. That should be subject to a broader review by Justice Department and ought not to be left to the sole discretion of one operational agency of the federal government.
In 2003, the federal government spent $6.5 billion to create 14 million classified documents. There are several classifications. The most used by TSA and Homeland Security is SSI, Sensitive Security Information, or Official Use Only. Some of the documents that my sources provided me, some memos that were stamped for official use only, were vacancy announcements that were posted on the internet, and one was a memo to employees to join them for Krispy Kreme donuts and coffee for a going-away party. Not exactly a top government secret, but these are the kind of documents that TSA was randomly labeling SSI for official use only, even though they denied that there was any randomness to it. They didn't comment on the Krispy Kreme donut memo.
TSA management sometimes used other methods, besides the SSI designation, to discourage its critics. In 2007, Jeffrey Denning left the Air Marshal Service. That same year, his Army Reserve Unit was activated and sent to Iraq. He served a year overseas. When he returned home in 2008, he received a phone call from the TSA.
I thought Iraq was kind of nerve-wracking, driving around and hope not to get blown up. I wasn't even home from Iraq for a week. I hadn't even unpacked my duffel bags yet. The TSA's calling me and asking me about my personal and private emails?
Captain Denning.
The caller identified himself as being from the TSA's Office of Special Investigations and wanted to know about an email Captain Denning had sent while he was in Iraq. The content of that mail included a discussion about air marshals speaking out to the media on security and management issues.
We need more details.
I thought it was the most devastating thing on the planet to me, to be able to come home to that. Was the government looking and monitoring my emails and my conversations with my wife all this time?
The surveillance started about 2 months after my testimony. Probably at least 3 separate times that I can remember that I caught them. Well, I don't know how many times they were out there, I didn't know. 4 days before Christmas, the mailbox was destroyed, and my mail was stolen. The wires going to my house were cut. A couple months later, door would be open. No one was there. Nothing was taken. This was pure intimidation. When I filed the complaint in December of 2004, specifically with the corruption in the Las Vegas field office, a lot of guys did come forward, and I give them credit. A lot came forward during that investigation of the field office. So they deserve a lot of credit. There were other guys that bowed out in the end, and, you know, that's their choice. You know, if you got family and they're worried about that, and, I mean, that's how the agency works. They threaten you. You've got a good job. You've got a secure job. You're making good money. Fortunately, I'm not married. I don't have any children. It's just me. Take my job away? Fine, I'll go live in my car for a while. I'll get another job. I didn't care.
Really, in 2003 through 2005, that was sort of that you know, Humphrey Bogart, Caine Mutiny, stay away from my strawberries sort of environment. You know, it's extreme paranoia mixed with all sorts of egos. And the bottom line is, the well-intended guy flying every day had no meaningful outlet to express their concerns. And of course, they'll come back and say, oh, that's simply not true. You know, they could notify their supervisor, they could drop a note in the Dropbox. Yeah, the Dropbox they had was about as meaningful as putting your sincere expression of concern into a shredder, because that's all they would do with it. And God forbid you had an intelligent comment to make, you'd be labeled as a troublemaker.
In the military, you know, in the team that I was associated with, we'd all get together and work as a team, and we'd come out to a conclusion of, hey, here's how to best operate, here's how to best win, here's how to best complete a mission successfully. And it wasn't that way in the Air Marshal Service, and it was what I call the ostrich syndrome. You know, their heads are buried in the sand.
What we need to do is identify the threat, deal with it in an effective, cost-effective manner, and listen to the line agents. Do not have failure of the imagination.
June 29th, 04. It was a very scary, surreal flight. I first heard about Flight 327 from angry pilots who were calling me and urging me to look into the matter. They even accused us of covering it up. And in particular, what the pilots were saying to me, they were saying, this is happening all the time. You need to look at this. I was 21C. I'm either 1 or 2 rows in front of the exit row. The
plane takes off, and when the unfasten seatbelt sign comes on, it was all of a sudden there were all these men, Middle Eastern men, that got out of their seats, and they're walking up and down the aisle. When I saw these men stand up, they could have been blonde-haired, blue-eyed men, but it was standing up in unison and walking up and down the aisles the way that they were doing it that really had me concerned. And the walking up and down the aisles wasn't just someone that walks up and down the aisle for exercise, but it was a methodical walk, almost as if counting the seats or counting the passengers.
327 from Michigan to LA. It hit the headlines because of the actions of more than a dozen musicians on board. Most of them were from Syria. They disrupted the flight continuously. They made numerous trips to the lab with their cell phones, with a McDonald's bag full and then not full. They were giving thumbs-up signs to each other. They appeared to be counting passengers.
The one thing that I think unnerved me the most was the gentleman behind me who had on a light blue jogging suit with writing on the back of it. When he walked past me and he went up to the first-class bathroom, and he was in there a long time. And when he came back and passed me, and again, he was sitting right behind me, when he passed me, he reeked of this chemical smell, the smell that you smell in the bathrooms, the toilets, and the airplane bathrooms, and it just reeked.
What caught my attention about the details of the flight were the repeated trips to the lab. The FBI had done a report earlier that year. There wasn't a whole lot of publicity about it, but I was aware of it, that they were warning airlines, particularly overseas, to stop people from congregating near the rear lab. They were going into the lab repeatedly, staying for long periods of time, and were blocking the lab door. And they sent out that bulletin because they were concerned that terrorists were going to try and sneak bomb parts onto a plane and assemble the bomb in the lab.
It was one of those things that you're looking for assurance or reassurance from someone that this isn't happening, or do you see this happening? And in fact, there was one gentleman that stood at the front of the plane, well, the front of the coach, with his arms crossed for a good part of the flight, if not a good three and a half hours flight. And he just stood there with his arms crossed, staring down the aisle, and I thought he was the Federal Air Marshal. I come to find out later that he wasn't. He was a passenger, and he had told his wife that this was not going to happen on his watch.
Prior to landing, there was an awful lot of activity that kicked up again. There was a man doing knee bends in the aisle. There was a mad rush to the front of the airplane towards the cockpit, but the man suddenly veered to his right and went into the lab where he stayed for 20 minutes. This is when, the seatbelt sign has come on again, and that's when a lot of activity was taking place, when the, passenger seatbelt sign was on.
When I heard the stewardess repeatedly tell them to sit down, and they didn't, and that's when I closed my eyes, and I just was praying. I thought, this is it. And you just start thinking about your family, and hopefully it's not going to be too painful. It was to that degree that I really thought that was it.
327 exit here, and Papa, cross, runway 25 right, and then ground 121.75, traffic legal view.
And at the end of the flight, they seem to have given a, we're not going to go through with it, a sort of, it's off kind of motion.
I couldn't get off the plane fast enough. And as I got off the plane and I went through the gate, I saw 3 policemen coming towards the gate, and I thought, good, good. And that was it.
Other passengers on the flight did come forward and talk to me. They had kept their boarding pass, so I was able to confirm they were, in fact, on Flight 327 before I interviewed them. They saw, the guy doing the knee bends. They saw the guy counting passengers. They saw one guy doing this and another guy doing this. They saw him going into the lab for 20 minutes at a time. And they were afraid. They were genuinely afraid.
The agencies came out and said the problem that happened on that flight were the passengers who overreacted. There was no terrorist activity. There was no probes. They switched the blame to the passengers.
There was nothing out of the ordinary. And
I first heard the terms probe and dry run after my initial story on 327 hit the newsstands. Air marshals started calling me and saying, you're on the right track. This is what we're seeing. This is what we think happened. There were air marshals who thought it was a probe, and there were others who thought it was a dry run. The difference, a probe, is activity designed to get reaction, to maybe out an air marshal, to probe and see what you're going to do, what kind of security measures are taking place. A dry run, which most air marshals think this was, would be a dress rehearsal of a hijacking. I've been involved in at least 3 what I believe to be serious probes.
where I thought that there were Arab males on my flight that were testing the security on board that aircraft.
I had airline captains telling me what was happening, similar probes and dry runs on their flights. I was hearing it from flight attendants. There were reports filed. There was one incident that was very serious. An air marshal actually broke down the door of the front lab because the passenger had been in there way too long and discovered that he had actually removed the mirror from the wall. There was about a half dozen probes that I reported initially with 327.
Congress said, hey, we got a report from these air marshals that these probes are happening. We want to know about them. And Director Quinn sends a letter back and says, nothing's happening on our watch. Well, what Quinn didn't know was these air marshals had already submitted their mission reports to the House Judiciary Committee. And then the House Judiciary Committee comes back, sends a letter back to Quinn going, hey, we know you're lying. We're going to give you a second chance. Next thing you know, they're backing a truck up to the Capitol, and they're pulling out hundreds of these mission reports and giving them to the House Judiciary Committee. They lied. They got caught.
The Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General spent almost a year investigating Flight 327. However, when the OIG released its report, most of it was deleted. Audrey Hudson filed a Freedom of Information Act request in an effort to extract a more complete version. When finally released, the report verified passenger accounts of the Syrians' behavior. It also revealed even more disturbing facts.
Initially, after 327, the department said that they had air marshals on board and that the air marshals' account differed from the passengers and that none of this behavior took place. However, the IG report noted that the marshals were concerned before the plane even left the airport. They were concerned in the airport. They were noting the activity of the passengers and noting it as suspicious and alerting each other to their suspicion. So the air marshals, in fact, already had these guys on their radar. The pilot was concerned enough that he called ahead to the airport to make sure that there was security to greet these musicians. The report found that 8 of these passengers, when they renewed their visa and it was run through the FBI background check, there were criminal hits. The IG had investigated thoroughly the immigration status of these musicians and found that a number of the musicians had been involved in similar disruptions aboard airplanes, including the band leader who had an intelligence report on him from his behavior on a January flight earlier that year. One of the key findings of the IG report was that the Air Marshal Service needed to coordinate with the FBI. They needed in bureaucracies, they needed a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, to work together. However, when the TSA signed off on the IG report, they said that such a memorandum was not necessary.
Many of the same security lapses revealed by Flight 327 resurfaced on Christmas Day 2009. A Nigerian man attempted to blow up Northwest Airlines Flight 253 to Detroit with bomb components he smuggled on board and assembled in the lab. Most significantly, U.S. agencies had ample information to revoke his visa and put his name on the no-fly list. In this case, the man's own father had alerted authorities to his son's terrorist connections. It's the same old story. Failure to share information, failure to turn raw data into actionable intelligence, failures followed by senseless, knee-jerk reactions focused on the wrong people.
About 6 months after the most serious probing incident that I was involved in, I was sent back to Atlantic City for other training. At that time, I asked the director of the training there if he was training air marshals on what happened on my flight with the probe. And he indicated to me he didn't know what I was talking about. And I explained it to him, and he said, we know nothing about it. And then I explained the 2 other incidences that I had. He didn't know about them either. The director of the Air Marshal Service was not distributing these reports to other law enforcement agencies or even to other air marshals. Well, the question is, why would the manager sit on this information? Isn't that exactly what happened prior to 9/11 with the FBI? Their FBI agents were sending information up the chain of command and it wasn't getting to headquarters? Isn't that exactly was one of the causes of 9/11? And here we are, after 9/11, doing the exact same thing?
We proposed in the Pan Am 103 Commission the establishment of an Assistant Secretary of Transportation for Aviation Security and a small unit within the government whose job would be to gather intelligence from foreign and domestic sources, evaluate that information, and disseminate it, and do this without regard to bureaucracy status. It was never done.
There's a place where airplanes are dumped when they're removed from service. It's called the Boneyard. It filled up quickly after 9/11, when hijackers crippled the airline system and traumatized the nation. Many of those aircraft sit here today, silent monuments to the brutal calculus of terror. By sowing fear, jihadists wield power out of all proportion to their numbers. They threaten not just lives, but a way of life, fostering a paranoid mindset in which innocent travelers accept being bullied, harassed, and stripped of their constitutional rights. Al-Qaeda succeeded on 9/11 because people at the top levels of government valued their promotions and pensions more than the public trust, a situation by no means unique to the TSA. The sad reality is, despite huge expenditures and dangerously expanded authority, we still don't have a system that is rational, effective, and proportionate to the threat. We continue to sacrifice our resources and freedoms for nothing more than an elaborate facade of security.
The reports I get is the performance actually has been going down. The larger the workforce, the actual performance in detection, which is monitored by both the General Accounting, TSA itself, and then the IG of Homeland Security. But those reports are classified. You wouldn't want to see them because they're quite frightening. And actually, of late, they've, with more personnel and more technology, they've even performed poorer.
I honestly think that we were safer before 9/11 than we are now. What we've got now is nothing but security theater. Meaning, all of these bells and whistles that you see is only meant to make you feel safe. But they're not.
After I became an air marshal, I actually wrote my congressman, and I said, hey, here are some of the things that I see prior to entering the airplane that just aren't good. Some staffer wrote me back and said, it's okay, the TSA is in charge.
The TSA was asked to participate in this film. We invited them to explain their side of the story, to refute our claims and talk about how the system has been improved and strengthened. They refused.